On the beautiful eastern coast of the Bruce Peninsula, huddled between the Niagara Escarpment and the Georgian Bay rocky shore, there is an enchanting hamlet. It is called Dyers Bay.
I first came up here at the age of 10 in 1950 with my stepfather and my mother, and I have been here now for 61 consecutive years and never missed a year coming, even when I was in the military. So it's a record that I'm quite proud of and happy to have. This has always been a lovely place. The people have been extremely wonderful and friendly. Most of the people up here at the time when I first got here were either from Michigan or Ohio, some from Illinois, and now it's divided mostly between Canadians and Americans.
In 1967, my sister Ruth Kirk and her family were hiking the Bruce Trail. They got to Dyers Bay and they found a little cottage right next door to us, and it had a well with a pump, it had a boathouse, and it had an outhouse, and it cost $3,500. This was in 1967.
I first came here when I was 6 months old, so I don't have a whole lot of memories of that particular trip, but that was the beginning of a love affair with this area. My grandfather was introduced to this area through his work. He worked for Hobbs Glass Company in London and used to have to come here on occasion to install and repair church windows. And he was an avid fisherman too, and he was introduced to the fishing here, and he fell in love with the place. So when he went back to London, he started bringing his family up here for camping and fishing, and then they moved to Detroit, and my parents were married there, and they continued to come up here and bought our old cabin down the road in 1936. And I came up the next year after they bought the place.
And I've spent all my life here in the summertime. I think my first visit here, I was probably 3 or 4 years old. One of my earliest memories in life is my first trip up to Dyers Bay. And I can remember very distinctly leaving Wyerton, coming north, hitting the washboard logs that were at the top of the hill. I guess a lot of people will remember those, and then hitting the dirt road. And it was thunder and lightning, and and late at night, and my aunt and uncle and my mother and father and I ended up stuck in the mud in a farmer's field, someplace I think near Ferndale. And I was quite young, probably 3 or 4 years old, but I can still remember my father deciding he had to get out of the car and walk to a nearby farmhouse that had their lights on. And he did. He went off into the thunder and lightning, and he traipsed through the mud into this farmhouse, and the farmer hitched his team of horses, came and attached it to our old car, and pulled us all out of the mud and put us back on what is 6 the dirt road onto 6. And they tell me later that my dad and my uncle tried very hard to offer him money or something to thank him for this wonderful gesture of what he did, and he refused anything. He just would not take a cent. And I always think about what a wonderful introduction to Canada.
My first experience of Dyers Bay was we were living in a motel suite waiting to find a house to move into, and a friend from work said, "Would I like to go camping on the Bruce next weekend?" And anything to escape from a motel room with 3 small children, I said, "Yes, please." And Rita, bless her, agreed that I could go, and we agreed that she'd spend the next weekend in Toronto with a friend. So we drove up here, and we came down into this little hamlet by the water, and I remember walking along the dock and my friend saying to me, "Do you know what has nothing at each end and goes up in the middle?" And I said, "No." And he pointed to all the license plates and he said, "Ohio," because nearly every car in Dyers Bay at that time came from Ohio. Of course, this was known as Little Ohio. And I remember walking down the road here and seeing this cottage with a window right on the road, and I thought, how stupid to put a window right on the road like that. And 20 odd years later, that's the cottage we bought.
First, I want to tell you how my mother and dad first came to Dyers Bay. They both loved to fish, and my dad saw an ad in an outdoor magazine for the Mountain Trout Lodge at Gillies Lake. They had cottages for rent, so he rented one. And when they got up here, the cottage had 2 holes cut in the side of the building for windows. There weren't any sashes or no screen, and the floor was dirt, and my mother said no. So they left, and on their way out they saw the sign for Dyers Bay, so they came down to see what was here. My dad went down to the beach and happened to run into Jack McNair and asked him how the fishing was, and Jack said, "Prospects are good." That was his standard when anybody asked him, prospects are good. So anyhow, they asked if there was a place to be rented, and they found out there was one place called the Linton Cottage, which is now where Jeremy Mason lives. And anyhow, they rented that cottage and fished, and the fishing was good and the cottage was nice, so they came back the next year. And also I came with them, and then aunt and uncle. And in the meantime, some years before, Art Tyndall, who had half of the store, sold his half to his brother and bought this lot and put this cottage up to be used. He was going to use it as a rental. And then he decided he wanted to go south, so he put it up for sale. And my dad was looking for a place to buy, so they got together, and Dad bought this, and we've been here ever since.
Dyers Bay was named after John James Dyers. He was the chief clerk of the British Admiralty for many years. The British Admiralty, under the direction of Admiral Henry Bayfield, conducted detailed surveying of Lake Huron and Georgian Bay early in the 19th century.
Pardon the smile on my face, my friends, dreaming of reaching my journey's end. I made it straight from my heart's desire. It's good to know I'm near the home fire. All of the folks that I love.
Both of my parents were teachers, school teachers, so we were able to spend the majority of the summers up here. And of course, back then there was no electricity in the area. Our heat was provided by logs that we drug down from the top of the cliff that had been scorched by the forest fires and cut up and put in the fireplace. My mother prepared our meals and some of the most delicious berry pies on the old wood-burning kitchen range. For light, we used kerosene lamps, and later on we did have running water. It was me running up and down the hill to the lake with water buckets.
When we first got here, there was no, it wasn't covered or anything. The outside boards were the inside boards. You could look through the knotholes right to the outside and see what you wanted. There was no electricity anywhere in the village at the time. But we had a wooden cook stove, and when it was warm, they used a Coleman 2-burner stove, which worked well, and then we had Coleman lanterns for in the evening. And we had a path down over the hill for our outhouse. And for water, every morning I would take two 2-gallon buckets and a rope and go down to the end of the pier and get water, which we used for drinking and cooking and so forth. The water was very pure. In fact, it was known all over the world that Georgian Bay was one of the purest bodies of water in the world.
All of the folks that I love are there. I got a date with my favorite chair. With every
In my teen years, there were more girls than there were boys. And I can hardly remember a time when we didn't have a fire on the beach. In the night, we would take down an old record player and about a 100-foot extension cord, and we would dance down there and play music and have lots of fun, and we did that almost on a nightly basis all summer long. All the kids that were here were able to spend most of the summer here, as I was. One time we were down by the flume. There's a fellow that lived up on the flume, his name was Greiling, which lived next door to where Ned lives. And we were down at the flume with a bunch of girls, Linda and Barb Lambert and all that, and Jackie Coons. And Chips Greiling and I went back to his parents' cottage. They had an old, somewhere he got this old bear rug. And so we thought it would be a smart idea to take the bear rug and lay in wait up at the flume for the girls to come back up, which we did very diligently. And then when it got late and everybody was walking up the flume to get back to Gillies Lake, I jumped out of the bush with this bear rug on, yelling and screaming. The girls could be heard in Lion's Head. They fell down the hill into all the poison ivy. And many of the girls that ran in panic for no reason whatsoever came down with severe poison ivy rash. Okay, that's one of my stories. They've never forgiven me even to this day.
I got a date with my favorite chair. With every step, every hope grows higher.
The charming village of Dyers Bay had its beginning in the lumber industry. During the late 19th century, extensive forests of the northern Bruce Peninsula were being harvested. The original square timber trade was based on the production of logs whose sides had been flattened by means of broadaxes. The square wood, or sticks, were then packed tightly aboard ships for the markets in Ontario, Quebec, and Europe. The purchasers were only interested in the tree trunk up to the first limbs. The production of the square wood left mounds of chips and heaps of slabs. Between 1870 and 1914, most of the original forest was cut to make square wood, or was burned by the fires that quickly started in the wood waste left behind. The first sawmill in Lindsay Township was established by Hiram Limburner and his son Robert at Dyers Bay in 1881. Timber was harvested from the area above Dyers Bay near Gillies Lake, located on top of the escarpment some 300 feet above Georgian Bay. From here, the water was taken to power the mill.
Limburner Sawmill, which started operation in 1881. Horace Limburner and Robert, his son, who at the time was around 17 or 18 years old, when they started operating the mill in 81, they would skid the logs. All the logging was done in the winter back then because all you had was horses and crosscut saws. So the only way they could move the logs in the wood was make ice roads and such. But anyway, and they would bring the logs and throw them over the edge of the escarpment. It wasn't a sheer bluff, it was a slope, and it still is. It's similar to that. And so, and you can still see where it's dug, and you see the talus, or the slope where all the stuff they blasted. We found a few of the rocks where they had drilled in there for blasting out the rock. Anyway, they'd tie into that, and they built a flume, a logging flume. They would run it through the ground, and then where it no longer was a trough, would carry the water, they built a wooden flume. And there's a picture showing the flume where it starts down, and based on that, I'd guess the flume was probably 3 feet across at the bottom and sloped up maybe to 5 feet. That's purely a guess based on looking at the width of the boards and such. The other thing they would do to control the water flow at the mill, as well as be able to run the logs down, they built a sluice gate in the flume, basically a dam, but they would drop boards or maybe a sheet of metal. I don't know what they actually had. The picture shows a windlass where they're dropping something, and they would put that down overnight probably, bring the lake level up a couple feet or so, and they were able to bring more logs down, and then when they were ready to run the mill, they had a lot more water to run the mill. On Gillies, there was a steam tug called the Gertie, and as I've read that, as far as I know, it was the only steam tug on an inland lake in Ontario. Now that may or may not be true, but I read that somewhere. And the Gertie was up there, and they hauled it up. How in the world they got it up from Dyers Bay level up to Gillies Lake, which is close to 300 feet above bay level.
At the beginning of the 20th century, the Seaman Kent Mill started operations near where the government dock was later built. This became a major operation, reaching a production of 1.25 million feet of lumber and some 300,000 shingles in 1906. Captain John Spence built the first Dyers Bay General Store in 1880 to serve lumbermen, local farmers, and later tourists.
The store, it was built in 1880. Back in those days, there were lumber mills all up and down Dyers Bay because they were cleaning off the virgin timber from the whole peninsula, and an awful lot of it went through Dyers Bay. And so the store was there in 1880, and I think the Tyndalls had that at the time because I saw a picture taken in the 1880s somewhere, and it was all Tyndalls in the front of the picture. So anyhow, in the 30s, it was owned by Art and John Tyndall. They were brothers. John sold his half to Clayton Brinkman and Ed Hill. And I think Clayton was just a partner money-wise because Ed Hill ran the store. And when we first started coming here, Ed Hill was running the store. And I remember there was a gas pump out front, and it had a big glass cylinder that went up, and it was marked in numbers, and they were imperial gallons. So he would ask you how many gallons of gas you wanted. You would tell him, and he'd start pumping like this, and you'd see the gas go up in there, and it would fill up that cylinder up to whatever you said. And then they just pump it into your car, and you can watch that gas go down. I always remembered that. And anyhow, Ed finally sold to Croft Garnham, who also had the Lakeside Inn, and he had that for quite a few years. And then he sold it to a couple of ladies by the name of Dorothy Hunter and Ola Cannon, and they had it for a short while. One of those ladies married Jack McNair in the fall, and I think that marriage lasted over winter and then was dissolved in the spring. That wasn't Jack's cup of tea.
The store originally had been owned by a Mr. Spence, but it was, but then it was Tyndall's store. That we had bought the store from Lawrence Lynch. But in the meantime, there had been several, the first store had burned. It was a general store, and they even sold a little bit of lumber and chicken feed and, you know, that type of thing. And just a general store, nails, hardware, food of course. And so we were there 11 years.
Early settlers came mainly by boat to nearby coves and then by horse to their final settlement area. The new settlers were families who dared to start a new life in a rich and beautiful area, but under very difficult conditions.
I may talk about my teenage years a little, although I know you've talked to Denny. And Denny has all the stories because he was always involved in all the stories. I mean, I was involved in some of them, but he never missed an occasion. We had such a great group of friends here in our teenage years. Strangely enough, we never really got into any serious trouble. There was a group of anywhere from 10 to 20 of us that were always looking till the next kid arrived, you know, when somebody came, and oh, so exciting when somebody bought a cabin that was a new kid here that we could recruit into our gang of kids. We went square dancing 2 nights a week, Wednesdays and I think it was Friday or Saturday nights, and the older guys in the gang could drive a car, borrowed Mom and Dad's car, and off we would go. And square dance till we could barely stand up. Stokes Bay and Lions Head had the square dancing. And they had callers, and it was just great fun. I'm sure quite a few people will remember that. And there's quite a few of us still here that are in that gang of friends that have never lost our friendship together. Some Americans, some Canadians. And the other thing we used to love doing was hiking to the lighthouse. Of course, there was no road to the lighthouse. And we would set out with our bathing suits and hike there and swim in the basin and out to the old shipwreck and swim out. You had to swim out to it at the time, and we would dive into it and traipse around in it. And the lighthouse keeper would usually take us up into the lighthouse, and we would picnic and swim, and that was something we would do often. We would also hike ourselves up the flume to go to Gillies Lake, because part of our friends lived up there. And what I do know about the cabin next door that we've purchased, I'm not sure, 10 years ago, that it is, I think, the oldest log cabin that's still standing at the bay. It was a copy of the Hoy cabin, Sampson Hoy cabin, which is on down a few more cabins. And Judge Hoy had built a log cabin, turn of the century, early 1900s.
In 1900, an important fishing industry began at the Wingfield Basin north of the village. Wingfield Basin bears the name of Lieutenant David Wingfield, who first sounded the bay in 1815. He was a member of the Royal Navy's Pioneer Hydrographic Survey of the Georgian Bay coast. The Wingfield Basin was a safe and natural harbor for fishing boats. Captain Prankhurst Menery selected the basin as his main station. By 1907, on the adjacent property, ice houses, fish houses, net sheds, net reels, and living quarters for the fishermen were installed. Ice was used to keep the fish fresh for the market. The fish were shipped from Wingfield Basin to the Dyers Bay dock, and from there shipped by boat to Wyerton for loading onto trains.
The old dock down here in Dyers Bay when I first got here was nothing but wood, big, huge wooden timbers. And the timbers are still underneath the dock to this day. And it was quite the thing to see the tugboats come in. And where the community house is now was an ice house. And they would cut the ice in the wintertime, put it in the ice house, and put sawdust over it to keep it for when the tugboats come in, and they would clean the fish, and then a truck would come down and they would cart the frozen fish away.
In the years after the First World War, a new industry began to flourish in the area: tourism. Dyers Bay in particular offered beautiful scenery, quietude, and excellent fishing. Tourists came from the United States and southern Ontario. Tourists began coming to Dyers Bay around 1920. They set up tents near the store and the Seaman Kent Mill. As fishing was a main attraction, these tourists needed fishing guides. The first guides in the area were William Lynch, Ed Wardrop, Art Tyndall, John Tyndall, and the sparkling Jack McNair.
The fishing was always good here. People used to come up on a narrow gauge railroad to Wyerton and then take a bus from there on up here, and then they would stay in the hotel, the Lakeside Hotel. And there were several guides down at the bay who rented fishing boats, or they would take you out and guide themselves. And so the people in the hotel would go down and either rent a boat or go out with guides. And the fishing was very good.
During the days of lumber industry, there was an informal school for the children of the timber workers. In 1885, the first school was authorized by the township. Alex Simpson was appointed chairman of the Board of Trustees. The first teacher was Mrs. Janet McLennan, who had a yearly salary of $150. Jack McNair was a very outspoken and indeed quite colorful character. Among his eccentricities, he kept raccoons and a black bear as a pet. Exceptional fisherman, hunter, diligent and hard-working, he certainly commanded attention in the village. No one thought that Jack could ever get married, but he did. However, the story goes that his marriage only lasted 3 days.
Jack McNair was quite a character. He did some guiding, and he had a couple of rental boats down here of old fishing scows. And Jack had kind of a high-pitched voice, and you could hear him talking all over the bay when he was out, when he had people out there guiding. He was quite a character. He always had a stub of a cigar in his mouth. and had an old model, I believe it was a Model A Ford pickup truck that he drove around.
Jack McNair going up and down the road with the shortest cigar in his mouth that anybody could possibly smoke. He only had, I never saw him with a cigar in his mouth that wasn't any longer than that. And he chewed on that thing all day long. I know my mother, when she was here, one of the funny stories was that she was down on the beach in her bathing suit. And I took a picture of her, and she's laying there like Marilyn Monroe, you know. And in the background, standing right behind her is Jack McNair with his little cigar in his mouth. And I can remember my mother just hated that picture because Jack ruined her shot, you know, her Hollywood moment, you know.
I'm Bill McNair. Jack McNair was my great uncle. A lot of memories of Jack when I was a kid. I used to go down and watch him feed the raccoons. He'd have 25 or 30 raccoons in the house any given evening, feed them a bit of bread. He was pretty close to my dad. There was a lot of fishing stories and hunting stories and trips to Johnson's Harbor in his old jitney. It took forever to go. Went up, I remember different times going up and helping him gather up nets on the shore. I have no idea where the nets came from or what he was doing with them, but he seemed to want them. And I have a few artifacts that some have come from Jack, some are similar to Jack's. I have, as you can see, shotguns and bear traps and a 44 that didn't belong to Jack, but it was his brother's and his dad's before that. The wolf he shot was, I'm not sure what the circumstances of the particular wolf were, but I know Jack shot a lot. I know he shot bears. I'm not sure it's his bear trap, but I know he shot one with a 22 in the bear trap one time. He used to trap bears. This was my great-grandfather's bear trap.
With no electricity, no refrigerators, the tourism created a need for ice in the summer. Jack McNair built an ice house near the dock where he stored ice in the winter. Using sawdust as insulation, ice was then sold to the tourists in the summer for their ice boxes.
For refrigeration, about every third day we had to go down to Jack McNair's ice house and get a 50-pound block of ice and try to get it back to the ice box at the cabin before it melted. So that was always a chore too, and the ice house also served as a cold storage for the fishermen, where they could store their fish that they didn't have room for in their own cabins, their own facilities. So there was always fish stored on the ice in there.
By 1940, there were quite a few cottages in the area, mostly Canadians. The idea of a building for the community's social activities was first proposed in 1938. In that year, a shore dinner was organized to collect funds for the project. However, the outbreak of war in 1939 put the project on hold until the 50s. The community had grown considerably by then, with many Americans also building cottages in the village.
So many wonderful memories. We would have barbecues at the beach with the fish. All my dad and his friends and my aunts and uncles would all bring back. In the meantime, I had several aunts and uncles that came up to visit us, and they all either built or bought cabins at the bay. So there ended up being a whole group of us from Toledo, Ohio, that were involved with the early years here. And I think that's how most Americans found themselves here. They were looking for something a little different than the developed areas of Michigan, and didn't really like the cabins right next to each other, developed areas, and they wanted good fishing. And so I think that's pretty much why there are so many Ohio, Michigan, and a few Illinois, Indiana people. And if I have something to say to my Canadian friends, thank you for being such hosts for all these years. I guess it'll be something that'll, be important in our family for forever.
In 1956, Jack McNair invited residents to a meeting in his ice house near the dock. At that meeting, he offered to donate the house to be used for the community for their social activities. The community was to take over remodeling and maintenance of the building. This was the beginning of the Dyers Bay Association. The clubhouse was further renovated in 1973, and the renovated ice house is now the Association Clubhouse, known as the house that Jack built. The beautiful Cabot Headlight Station can be reached by following the Dyers Bay Road. Neglected for several years, it was restored and maintained by the Friends of Cabot Head. The access road to Cabot Head was also the result of the work of these dedicated people. When the station was still in operation, the lighthouse keeper and his family had to come to town by boat when the weather conditions were favorable.
Cabot Head, we'd been up here some time, and suddenly there was a bit of an uproar, led largely by Tove Bowman, who lived at the end of the bay, about Cabot Head, because the lighthouse, the Coast Guard no longer needed the lighthouse, and they'd leased it to someone, and they said, no, you can't, no one can go up there and get through to Wingfield Basin, and people got all up in arms about it, because people had been going up there and through the grounds of the lighthouse out to the basin, and that we said to council, we think we should do something with it, and we then formed the Friends of Cabot Head, and I was the first chair of that, and we negotiated with the Coast Guard and the council made an agreement with the Coast Guard to take the property on, and we had an agreement with the council to lease it for $1 a year for, I can't remember, 3 years, to do a feasibility study. And Anne and Don Bard from Cape Chin Connection were very much involved, as was Ina Toxopius and Tove Bowman. And during the time of the feasibility study, we got grants and raised money, and we gutted the place and we put it back together again, and we put the tower back on, and employed some students to do murals on the walls, and at the end of 3 years we went to council and said, we think it's feasible to restore the lighthouse because we've already done it.
One really bad storm, and well, we've had a lot of bad storms, but the one that I'm thinking of, there was a boat tied up here, and they came in when it was rough, and we tried to make them, it was a young couple, and we tried to make them go to the basin because there is shelter up at Cabot Head. But by that time I think they were too frightened to go anywhere, so they just tied up on the north side of the dock. I think at first they were on the south side, but they brought the boat around to the north side, and a lot of people stayed up all night, and they tried to, they held the boat, they got tires, they did everything, but eventually the boat was washed up onto the ramp and crashed. Anyway, the young couple that had the boat finished off the night at our place. They got a little bit of sleep, I guess. And they were from Honey Harbor over on the other side of the lake, over in the Muskoka district. And a few days after the boat was wrecked, somebody found the birth control pills down on the shore. And the next year when they come back to visit, they had a little one with them. So.
The vastness of the Great Lakes makes them truly inland freshwater oceans. Big storms have always been a high risk for navigation. Dyers Bay has often provided a safe shelter for large vessels when heavy storms make navigation difficult and risky. The Niagara Escarpment, one of the world's unique natural wonders, was declared World Biosphere Reserve by UNESCO in 1990. The escarpment, often called the Spine of Ontario, runs for 725 kilometers from Queenston, Niagara Falls to Tobermory, at the tip of the Bruce Peninsula and beyond. The Bruce Trail follows the edge of the Niagara Escarpment, and a beautiful section of the trail follows the edge of the escarpment right by Dyers Bay.
We got interested in the Bruce Trail. I can't remember the exact date, but around the early 70s. And as the Peninsula Club of the Bruce Trail was kind of re-energized by Ross McLean, we began to build trail, we began to be captains of the trails. The trails that we maintained and built are those that are above the Dyers Bay village. It's been years and years, but we have loved every summer to cut back the dogwoods that are falling down over the trail, to cut out the fallen logs, and generally enjoy the beauties of the trail and make it beautiful by the way we would trim back the grass and the weeds and all. It's been a wonderful time here, and we continue to come here. We are giving up our trail work. My husband's eyesight is too poor to do that anymore, but we still enjoy hiking on roads. There's lots of roads around for us to hike on, and we just love this paradise.
"20 years ago, Lawrence Lynch, with the help of Paul McPherson, both longtime residents, built the stone cairn as a tribute to early settlers in Dyers Bay. The flags of Canada, Great Britain, and Ontario represent the settlers who came to this place. Dyers Bay Today is a thriving village with a very active association made up of volunteers from the community. The Community Association organizes many social activities during the spring, summer, and fall, including potluck dinners, games, jazz nights, and the colorful Canada Day Parade, with a community barbecue, cottage sale, and fireworks. Wow! Yeah! Also, in the summer, the popular Story Barn brings the magic of storytelling for the enjoyment of children and adults alike.
Hey, Ron.
Welcome. What's your name? This is Jacob. Jacob's grandfather took the blanket and he turned it round and round and round. he said, as the scissors went snip, 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 and the needle went in and out, in and out, in and out. Just enough material here for a wonderful jacket. Well, Jacob wore that jacket, and he wore it, and he wore it. But as Jacob grew older, so the jacket grew older too. One day Jacob's mother said to him, Jacob, this jacket is too small, it doesn't fit you at all, and it's time to throw it out.
Winter is also a magical season at Dyers Bay. The snow in trees and on cottages give the village a captivating winter character, while the waters of Georgian Bay offer a dazzling display of ice formations with ever-changing shapes and colors. Dyers Bay is a unique place, rich in history and natural beauty. It has attracted many generations of residents who have come to explore, work, fish, establish residence, and to develop and transform this unique realm. But above all, to enjoy life and rejuvenate the soul.
coming home.